The house on Elm Street has been in our family for almost 80 years. I remember my late husband Fletcher telling me that his grandfather bought the land before the Great Depression, when Waco was a different town. The two-story house with its wide porch, high ceilings, and creaky floorboards is a witness to my entire family life. It was where Fletcher and I had raised our only son, Carmine, and where we'd had our boisterous Christmas dinners when the family got together. It's also where Fletcher quietly passed away in his sleep 5 years ago, leaving me alone to live out my days among the walls that hold echoes of our past. My name is Gwendolyn Hitch, and I'm 68 years old. I worked all my life as an elementary school teacher in Waco until I retired 2 years ago. Many of my former students now bring their children to the same school where I once taught them to read and write. Sometimes they stop to chat with me when they see me at the supermarket or in the park. It warms my soul, reminding me that my life has not been in vain. Waco is a small town. Everyone knows each other. I love my morning walks through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors, many of whom have lived here for decades. Mrs. Clark and her invariable rose beds, Mr. Donnelly walking his elderly dachshund, the Lorenzo family running the little bakery on the corner. They're all part of my world, small but cozy. After Fletcher died, I learned to live alone. The first year was the hardest. I woke up at night, reaching over to his side of the bed, finding only cold sheets there. I cooked for two out of habit and only realized my mistake when I sat down at the table, talking to emptiness, as if he could still hear me. But time heals, as they say. I found my rhythm, my little joys, gardening, reading, weekly book club meetings at the library. I was not exactly happy, but peaceful. The only thing that marred my life was my relationship with my son. Carmine had always been a wayward child, stubborn and determined. These qualities helped him do well in school and get a job with a construction company, where he quickly rose to the position of foreman. Fletcher and I were proud of him. But when Carmine married Mercy 5 years ago, our relationship began to deteriorate rapidly. Mercy Wilmot was a bright spot in our small town. She came from Tulsa and immediately attracted attention with her fancy clothes, loud laugh, and ambitious plans. She worked at a local beauty parlor, but kept talking about wanting to start her own business. Carmine fell in love with her at first sight. I tried to be happy for my son, but something about this woman alarmed me. Perhaps an overly bright smile that didn't reach her eyes, or the way she talked about people behind their backs. From the first days I met her, Mercy had made it clear to me that I didn't meet her standards. Gwenny, she immediately started calling me by that diminutive name I couldn't stand. You're so authentic. But a little makeup and a modern haircut could work wonders even at your age. I smiled and thanked her for the advice, though I wanted to remind her that I'd lived long enough to know who I was and what I wanted to look like. My gray hair in a simple bun, comfortable pants, and blouses in subtle colors were my choice, not the result of ignorance of current trends. With each visit, Mercy became more and more critical. She toured my home, clucking her tongue at the sight of old furniture and simple framed family photos. "This house is a gold mine," she said one day, standing in the middle of the living room. "The location, the square footage. If you sold it and invested in the right business, you could have a future for the whole family." I didn't say anything, but I could see the greedy gleam in her eyes. After the wedding, the visits became less frequent. Carmine always had excuses: work, renovations on their new house, weekend plans. When they did come, Mercy looked me over from head to toe and invariably found something to complain about. "Gwenny, that hair adds 10 years to your life. If I had my own salon, I could transform you so much that Carmine wouldn't recognize his own mother." Carmine used to laugh and say something like, "Leave Mom alone. She's old school." That hurt me even more, as if being old school meant being backward, unable to change. And yet, I had spent my life teaching my children new things, adapting to changing programs and technology. I even mastered the smartphone and social media, something many of my peers avoided. Fletcher was always a buffer between me and my son. He had a knack for smoothing over sharp edges, finding compromises. After he died, our communication with Carmine became strained. He called once a week, asked briefly how I was doing, and then quickly said goodbye. My invitations to come over for dinner were increasingly declined. Over the past year, I'd noticed that Carmine looked at the house the way his wife did, appraising it, as if estimating its value. One day, he even asked me if it was too much for me to manage on my own. Maybe you should think about a smaller apartment, he suggested casually. Or a nursing home. There's medical staff, supervision. I'm 68, not 98, I said. And I'm doing just fine on my own. He didn't insist, but I noticed the way he and Mercy looked at each other. Something had changed in their attitude toward me. They were coming over more often, showing unusual concern. Mercy even offered to help clean the house, though she'd never shown such an interest in housework before. You have so much stuff, Gwenny, she said, opening closets and drawers. Have you ever thought of having a garage sale? Get rid of all the extra stuff? Superfluous to her were the photo albums, the collection of antique Fletcher cups, the books I'd collected all my life. All these things held the history of our family, were part of me. That night, as I was leaving, Carmine mentioned it casually. By the way, Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe you should get me a power of attorney, in case something happens, so I can help with bills and medical decisions and stuff. There's nothing wrong with me, I replied, feeling the anxiety building inside me. If anything changes, we'll talk about it. He didn't insist, but his gaze turned cold. Mercy's face changed too, her smile turning into a strained grimace. After they left, I sat for a long time in the rocking chair on the veranda, the same one Fletcher liked to sit in. The cool evening air didn't soothe my troubled thoughts. Something was brewing, and I felt I had to be ready. It had been 2 weeks since that conversation. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I had just finished breakfast and was about to go into the garden when the doorbell rang. A young man in a courier service uniform stood on the doorstep. Mrs. Hitch, he asked, checking his clipboard. I have a registered letter for you. Sign here, please. I signed, took the envelope, and closed the door. Something about the official look of the letter made me wary. I sat down at the kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a document with official stamps and the heading, Notice of Court Meeting. I began to read, and with each line my hands trembled more and more. It was a notice that my son, Carmine Hitch, had filed a lawsuit asking the court to declare me incapacitated due to the early stages of dementia, and to appoint him legal guardian with the right to dispose of all my property, including the house. I reread the document 3 times, not believing my eyes. Dementia, me? Me, who still remembered the birthdays of all her former students, solved daily crossword puzzles, and had an active social life. The document mentioned testimony of increasing forgetfulness, inability to maintain the house, and signs of disorientation. Who could have given such testimony? Were Carmine and Mercy watching me, looking for any sign of aging, any forgotten detail to use against me? The trial was set for the 20th of the following month. I had a little over 3 weeks to prepare for my defense. I sat at my desk looking at this piece of paper that had ruined my entire life in a matter of minutes. My own son, my own flesh and blood, had decided he could just take my home away from me, accusing me of having dementia. The house where I had lived almost my entire adult life. A house where every corner reminded me of Fletcher. The initial shock turned to anger. A hot, all-consuming anger like I'd never felt in my life. How dare he? How dare they? It all made sense now. The sudden interest in my health, the questions about whether I was having a hard time on my own, the offers of power of attorney. They were setting the stage for this lawsuit. And I, a naive old woman, thought my son finally cared. But why? Why would they want my house? And then I remembered the twinkle in Mercy's eye when she talked about the gold mine. Her constant talk about having her own beauty parlor. They needed money for her business, and my house was the easiest way to get it. I wiped away the tears that had imperceptibly flowed down my cheeks. No, I won't let them do this. I'm not giving up without a fight. Fletcher had always said that behind the soft teacher exterior, there was a fighter in me. Now it was time to prove it. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number of my longtime friend Doris. If anyone could help me in this situation, it was her, the practical, sensible Doris who'd worked 30 years at the bank and knew everyone in town. Doris? It's Gwen. I need your help. I think I'm in big trouble. Doris Mulligan was always a reliable person. I met her 30 years ago when her oldest son was in the first grade where I taught. Unlike many other parents, Doris always made time to be involved in her son's school life, despite her employment at the bank. We bonded at school events and later became family friends. Fletcher loved to play chess with her husband Tobias while Doris and I discussed books and school gossip. Now, years later, our friendship has only grown stronger. After Fletcher died, Doris was there for me, helping me cope with my grief and loneliness. She stopped by every weekend with homemade baked goods, dragged me out for walks when I was ready to sit at home for days on end, immersed in memories. I knew I could trust her with anything. And yet, when I called her that Saturday morning, my voice shook with humiliation and pain. Telling someone, even your best friend, that your own son thought you were a senile old woman was unbearably embarrassing. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Doris said, listening to my rambling story. "Don't do anything, just wait for me." She arrived even earlier than promised. She was a short, energetic woman with a short salt and pepper haircut and shrewd brown eyes. Doris was the manager of a local bank branch and knew all about finances, loans, and other money matters I'd never understood. "Show me the papers," she demanded, as soon as I stepped through the door. I handed her the court notice. Doris scrutinized every line, the wrinkle between her eyebrows growing deeper. "It's outrageous," she said at last. "An outright lie. Anyone who's talked to you for 5 minutes would know you're of sound mind." "But why is Carmine doing this?" I asked, tears welling up in my throat again. Was the house really that important? Doris sighed and took my hand. "Gwen, I didn't want to tell you, but I think you should know now. Your son has been at the bank a lot lately. He's having money problems." "What kind of problems?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "He seems to be making good money at the construction company." "He does, but he spends a lot, especially his wife. I've seen their credit history. It's not very good. They took out a loan to buy a house 2 years ago, then another one for renovations, then a new car for Mercy." I listened and couldn't believe it. Carmine had always been frugal. Fletcher had taught him to value every dollar, to save for a rainy day. Had Mercy changed him like that? "And now," Doris continued, "they tried to get a business loan, but were turned down because of the debts they already had." "A business loan?" I remembered Mercy always talking about her own salon. "Yeah, to open a beauty salon." "Mercy Magic, that's what it's supposed to be called. Your daughter-in-law came in with a business plan. An ambitious one, I might add. An upscale, full-service salon from haircuts to spa treatments." I shook my head. Everything was coming together. The bank had turned down their loan, and now they'd found another way to get the money my house. "What should I do, Doris?" "The first thing to do is hire a good lawyer. I know one, not the most expensive, but very experienced. Hammond Peck. He specializes in just this sort of thing." I nodded, pulling out my notebook to write down the name. "Also," Doris lowered her voice as if someone might overhear us, "I'd check out your daughter-in-law's background if I were you. She came from Tulsa, right? What did she do there? Where did her experience in the salon business come from? You think there's something fishy going on?" "I don't know," Doris answered honestly, "but something tells me it's worth digging a little deeper. You know, Tobias has a friend who's a private investigator." "A private investigator. He used to work for the police, retired now, but sometimes he takes private investigations. Theobald Ray. I could get his contacts." I bit my lip in hesitation. A private detective? It sounded like something out of a detective novel. But on the other hand, if Carmine and Mercy were going to play dirty, maybe I should have used every means at my disposal. "Okay," I finally decided. "Find out, please." Doris smiled and squeezed my hand. "It's the right thing to do, Gwen. We're not going to let them take the house away from you. Not after everything you've been through." Monday morning, I was already sitting in Hammond Peck's modest office. His reception area was small, with shabby furniture and old-fashioned blinds on the windows. But the lawyer himself impressed me. He was a tall man in his 50s, with shrewd blue eyes and a calm, confident way of speaking. "Mrs. Hitch," he said after reviewing the documents, "these cases are unfortunately not uncommon. Children who want to gain control of their parents' estates often use allegations of incapacity. But don't worry, we have time to prepare." "What do we need to do?" I asked, relieved by his reassurance. First, we will organize an independent medical examination. We need a specialist's opinion that you are fully capable. Secondly, we'll collect testimonies from people who regularly communicate with you, neighbors, friends, former colleagues. Thirdly, we'll prepare documents to prove that you manage your household independently and successfully, pay your bills, and take care of your health. I nodded, making notes. The plan seemed reasonable. What about, I hesitated, not sure how to phrase it, an investigation? We suspect that my daughter-in-law may have a questionable past. Hammond tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. In these cases, any information can be useful. If you want to hire a private investigator, I don't mind, but note that it won't have any direct bearing on your competency case. I understand that, but I think it's important to know who I'm dealing with. In that case, go ahead. Just be careful not to do anything that could be construed as harassment or invasion of privacy. No illegal methods. I assured him that I would act within the law, and we arranged to meet again in a week. As soon as I left the lawyer's office, I called Doris. Do you have that detective's contacts? Yes. Write it down. Doris dictated the number to me. Tobias has already talked to him. He's ready to meet you. Theobald Ray lived on the outskirts of Waco in a small one-story house surrounded by a neat garden. When I drove up to his house that afternoon, he was working in the garden, trimming the hedges. He was a short, stocky man with a tanned, wrinkled face and attentive eyes. He looked to be in his 60s. Mrs. Hitch? He set aside the garden shears and wiped his hands on his jeans. Tobias told me you were coming. Come on in the house and we'll talk. Inside, the house was as neat as the garden. Simple, functional furniture, no unnecessary decorations. On the walls were a few pictures, apparently family photos. In the corner of the living room was a computer desk with a modern laptop, the only sign that the owner of the house was not completely behind the times. So, Theobald said, as we sat down at the kitchen table with cups of coffee, Tobias has summarized the situation. Your son wants to take the house from you using an incapacity suit, and you suspect that his wife may have some skeletons in the closet? I nodded, feeling a little awkward. It all seemed so wrong. Hiring a detective to dig into my own daughter-in-law's past. But what else was I supposed to do? Mercy Wilmot, now Hitch, I said. She came from Tulsa about 3 years ago. Worked at a beauty parlor called Curls and Lacquer on Main Street. Always talked about how she had a lot of experience in the salon business and a dream of starting her own business. Theobald was making notes in a small notebook. What exactly do you want to know? Anything that might help me understand why they're so desperate to get my house. If there's anything in her past that might be useful for a defense in court. The detective nodded. I got it. I'll start with a background check on her in Tulsa. See if she worked in beauty parlors there, if she had any legal problems, debts, lawsuits, standard procedure. How long will it take? Depends on what I find. I could have initial results in a few days. A more in-depth investigation, a week, maybe 2. I sighed. The court hearing was scheduled in 3 weeks. Time was short. Do what you can, Mr. Ray. I'll pay the rush fee. Theobald, please. He smiled for the first time since our conversation began. And don't worry about the extra fee. I like cases like this, where there's an opportunity for justice. The next days passed in feverish preparation for the trial. I underwent a medical examination by a neurologist recommended by Hammond. The doctor confirmed that I had no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. I gathered letters of support from neighbors, former co-workers, even the principal of the school where I had worked for almost 40 years. Doris helped me gather all the financial documents to prove that I pay my bills, property taxes, and insurance. All this time, I hadn't heard a word from Carmine. He didn't call, he didn't visit. It was as if by filing a lawsuit, he'd decided to cut me out of his life completely until the court decided. That silence hurt more than the lawsuit itself. Did money mean more to him than our relationship? Or had Mercy insisted on this behavior? I didn't know what to think, and that ignorance made my heart ache. The 5th day after we met, Theobald called. Mrs. Hitch, I have the first results. I think you should come down and take a look. I went to see him right away. Theobald met me on the doorstep with a serious expression. Come in, he said, ushering me into the living room. where a laptop computer and a stack of printed documents were spread out on a table. I managed to find something interesting about your daughter-in-law. I sat down on the couch, feeling my heart pounding. What was it? First of all, Mercy Wilmot isn't really Mercy Wilmot. Her real name is Mercedes Wilson. She changed her name 6 months before she moved to Waco. Why? I asked, surprised by this information. Probably to get a fresh start. Theobald turned the laptop screen toward me. Because she didn't have the best reputation in Tulsa. The screen opened to an article from the local Tulsa newspaper from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Beauty Crown Beauty Salon closes after scandal over unpaid wages." Crown of Beauty? I leaned closer so I could see the text better. She owned the salon? Yes, Theobald nodded. She'd opened it the year before this article. From the advertising, it was a full-service luxury salon. Mercedes Wilson, there's a picture of her in the article. It's definitely your daughter-in-law, promised clients and staff royal service. I looked at the article. It said the salon closed suddenly, leaving employees without a paycheck for the past 2 months. Clients who had paid in advance for subscriptions were also left with nothing. The owner of the salon disappeared without giving a reason for the closure. That's not all, Theobald continued, opening another tab on his browser. I found several complaints to the Better Business Bureau from former employees and customers of Crown Beauty. They claim Mercedes Wilson used fake accounts, overpriced cosmetics, and promised employees shares in the business that never materialized. I stared at the screen, feeling anger building up inside. It was the same pattern as now, promises of golden mountains, ambitious plans, finding money for the great dream. Were there any lawsuits? I asked, remembering the lawyer's words about the importance of legal evidence. A few small lawsuits from employees demanding payment of wage arrears, Theobald replied, showing me printouts of court documents. But most of them were unsuccessful because the company was declared bankrupt and Mercedes had already disappeared from the city. And 6 months later, she showed up here in Waco with a new name and no mention of her failed business. I shook my head, stunned by the extent of the deception. That's right, Theobald nodded. I'm still looking. I want to find some former employees who can give me more information, maybe even testimony if it comes to that. Thank you, Theobald, I said sincerely. It changes everything. Don't thank me ahead of time. He smiled slightly. I've only just begun to dig. Who knows what else we'll find? I left the detective's office with a heavy heart, but also with the feeling that I was finally getting some control over the situation. Now I knew who I was dealing with. Mercy, or Mercedes, wasn't just an ambitious woman with dreams of owning her own business. She was a con artist willing to use people to achieve her goals. And right now, it seems her goal was my house, and my own son was the means to that end. 3 days after our meeting, Theobald called again. His voice sounded agitated, which was unusual for this normally unruffled man. Mrs. Hitch, I found 2 former employees of Crown of Beauty. They've agreed to talk to us. Us? I asked, not expecting to have to meet these people in person. Yes, I think you should be present for the conversation. They want to know why we need information about Mercedes. They trust me, but they want to make sure we're not working for her. I agreed, even though the prospect of driving to Tulsa didn't make me happy. It was a 3-hour drive, and it had been a long time since I'd traveled that far alone. But Theobald offered to drive me, and I gratefully accepted. We left early the next morning. Theobald was a silent companion, which suited me just fine. I stared out the window at the fields and forests passing by, thinking about how strangely my life had turned. A week ago, I was just an old widow living a quiet life in my house. Now I'm traveling to another city to meet people who might help me expose a fraudulent daughter-in-law. Tell me about them, I asked Theobald when we were halfway to Tulsa. Audrey Voorhees, 32, was a senior stylist at Crown of Beauty. She had worked at several other salons in Tulsa before and had a good reputation in professional circles. Finley Taft, 27 years old cosmetologist, specialized in spa treatments and skincare. Both had worked at the salon since it opened and both suffered when it closed. Suffered in what way? Financially and reputationally. Mercedes convinced them to leave their previous jobs with the promise of high salaries and shares in the business. When the dealership closed, they were left without 2 months' paychecks. What's more, Finley took out a loan to invest in the salon. Mercedes convinced him it was a great investment. He'd lost that money too. I shook my head, struggling to contain my anger. How many lives had that woman ruined with her machinations? And now she was targeting my house, using my son as a tool. What about her reputation? I asked, remembering Theobald's words. When the salon closed so abruptly, some customers thought the employees were in cahoots with the owner, especially those who bought subscriptions and gift certificates. Word got out in Tulsa's small beauty industry community that those who worked at Crown of Beauty couldn't be trusted. Audrey and Finley had a hard time finding new jobs. This story only strengthened my resolve. I had to stop Mercy before she did more damage, not just to me but to my son, and possibly others in Waco who could be her next victims. We arrived in Tulsa around noon and went straight to the Green Lamp Cafe, where former Crown of Beauty employees were waiting for us. The establishment was located in a quiet neighborhood away from the tourist trails. It was cozy and not crowded inside, the perfect place for such a conversation. Theobald noticed Audrey and Finley sitting at a table in the far corner. He introduced me, and we sat down. I scrutinized them carefully, hoping to find sincerity in their eyes, not a desire for revenge against their former boss. Audrey was a tall, slender woman with short-cropped brown hair and expressive green eyes. Her hands, with long, manicured fingers, nervously fumbled through her napkin. Finley appeared to be a lean young man with a neat beard and an attentive gaze. He seemed calmer, but I noticed that he drummed his fingers on the table, a sign of underlying excitement. "So," Audrey began after we ordered coffee, "Mr. Ray said you were looking for information on Mercedes Wilson. Why?" I decided to be honest. These people deserve to know the truth. "She married my son," I answered. "Her name is Mercy Hitch now. They live in Waco and she works at a local beauty parlor. But now she wants to open her own salon, Mercy Magic. And to do that, she needs money." "History repeats itself," Finley muttered, shaking his head. "Yes," I sighed. "And she chose my house as the source of that money. My son filed a lawsuit to have me declared incompetent and gain control of my estate." Audrey and Finley looked at each other, a look of understanding on their faces. "Classic Mercedes scheme," Audrey said. "Find a funding source, squeeze it dry, and move on." "Tell me about her," I asked. "How did she convince you to work at her salon?" Audrey leaned back in her chair, gathering her thoughts. "I worked at Curl and Style, a nice salon in downtown Tulsa. One day a client came in, very stylish, very confident. It was Mercedes. She asked me about my experience, my technique, my fashion vision. After the haircut, she left a generous tip and her business card. Said she was opening a high-end salon and was looking for talented stylists. A week later, we met for dinner," Audrey continued. "She talked about her vision of Crown of Beauty, not just a salon, but a real temple of beauty, where clients will feel like queens. She promised a salary twice as high as I was getting, a percentage of product sales, a flexible schedule, and most importantly, a share in the business after a year of work. Said she wanted to build a team of not just employees, but co-owners interested in success." "Sounded too good to be true," Finley interjected. "But she was so convincing. She showed the business plan, the profit calculations, the salon design. She had the answer to every question." I nodded, recognizing the description. Mercy was just as persuasive with my son. Her confidence and ambition dazzled, making me believe in her big plans. "She did open a salon," Audrey continued, "and at first, things were going well. Luxury renovations, expensive furniture, quality cosmetics. Clients came in, many of them came back. But after about 6 months, the problems started." "What kind of problems?" Theobald asked, taking notes. "First, payroll delays," Finley replied. "A few days, then a week. Mercedes always found excuses. The bank delayed a transfer, the accountant was sick. Then there was a disruption in the supply of cosmetics. We were working with a brand called Lumina, expensive but very good. Suddenly, the products started to run out, and Mercedes replaced them with some cheap analogs, but she continued to bill customers at Lumina prices. And then she started selling subscriptions," Audrey interjected. Annual service passes at a deep discount. A lot of customers bought into the promotion, paying up front for the services. The money went to the salon, but for some reason not to pay our salaries or buy quality cosmetics. I even took out a loan to invest in the business. Finley grinned bitterly. Mercedes convinced me that if I became a minority partner now, I could increase my stake in a year. I believed her, invested $20,000, all my savings, and borrowed from the bank. The documents about my share were being prepared by a lawyer all the time, but they were never signed. And then came the collapse, I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, Audrey nodded. One day we came to work and the salon was closed. There was a notice on the door about temporary technical problems. We called Mercedes, but she didn't answer. After 3 days, it was clear that she had disappeared. Along with the money from the season ticket sales, Finley's investment and 2 other employees, without paying our salaries for the last 2 months. We went to the police, Finley said, but they weren't particularly helpful. Technically, Mercedes hadn't broken the law. The salon was bankrupt, but the fact that she knew about it in advance and kept taking money was hard to prove. We filed a civil suit, but by then she was gone and the company had no assets left. The story they told was horrible, but unfortunately not surprising. I'd seen how Mercy had charmed my son, how she'd made him believe in her grand plans. And now she was using him to get my house, another source of funding for her new scam. What happened to you after the salon closed? I asked, feeling genuine sympathy for these people. It was hard, Audrey admitted. In Tulsa, all the salons know each other. There were rumors that we were in cahoots with Mercedes, that we were involved in defrauding customers. Some former Crown customers were calling other salons, warning them about us. I couldn't find a job for months, had to move to Oklahoma City, start over. And I'm still paying off that loan, Finley added, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And the dream of having my own spa is on hold. As I listened to them, my heart clenched with pain and anger. This woman had shattered their dreams, stolen their money, tarnished their reputation, and now she was going to do the same to my son and me. I want to stop her, I said firmly. Stop her from destroying more lives. But to do that, I need your help. What exactly do you want us to do? Finley asked, leaning forward. Testimony, Theobald answered in my place. In court, if necessary. About what happened in Tulsa, about her modus operandi, about how she deceived people. Audrey and Finley looked at each other, their faces expressing doubt and fear. I'm not sure I want to get involved with her again, Audrey said slowly. It took me a long time to rebuild my life after Crown of Beauty. I understand, I said softly. And I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't desperate. This house is all I have left. It's where I've lived with my husband for 30 years, where I raised my son. I can't let Mercy take it away from me using false accusations of incapacity. And your son? Finley asked. Does he know who she really is? That question hit me in the heart. I remembered Carmine the way he'd been before he'd met Mercy. Friendly, honest, caring. How he'd changed over the years, becoming rigid and calculating. Was he aware of his wife's dark past? Or was he as much a victim of her manipulations as these people? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I don't think so. My son wouldn't knowingly participate in a fraud. She must have convinced him that I was really losing my mind, that it would be better for me to move into a nursing home or a small apartment. And what will happen to him when he finds out the truth? Audrey asked quietly. It's a question I've been asking myself ever since I found out about Mercy's past. What will happen to my son when he finds out he married a cheater? That all her promises, all her plans were just a way to gain access to money? Will it destroy his life, his self-esteem, his faith in people? I don't know, I answered again, tears welling up in my throat. But I have to try to protect him. And myself. There was a heavy silence in the cafe. We were each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Finley straightened up. I'll do it, he said. I'll testify in court. I'll tell everything I know about Mercedes Wilson and her methods. Audrey looked surprised by his decision. Are you sure, Finn? This could bring up the whole nightmare again. I'm sure, he nodded. We kept quiet for too long. Let her get away with it. Start over in another city. If I can prevent even one new scam, even one ruined life, I have to do it. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. This young man, who had already been hurt by Mercy, was willing to stand up to her again for justice. His bravery shamed me, for I had hesitated, worried about how Mercy's exposure would affect my son. "Thank you," I said, struggling to contain my emotions. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just stop her," Finley replied simply. "Don't let her do to others what she did to us." We exchanged contacts, and Theobald explained to Finley that he would need to be in Waco the day before the trial. We arranged to meet with the attorney and discuss the details of his testimony. As we were saying goodbye outside the cafe, Audrey suddenly put her arm around me. "Be careful," she whispered. "Mercedes is dangerous, not physically, but she's a master manipulator. When she feels threatened, she becomes ruthless." I nodded, realizing what she meant. Mercy will stop at nothing to get what she wants, and now that I was in her way, she would do anything to destroy me. The drive back to Waco passed mostly in silence. I reflected on what I had heard, on what was to come. Unanswered questions swirled in my head. Am I doing the right thing by exposing Mercy to my son and the whole town? What would happen to Carmine when he found out the truth about his wife? Would he be able to forgive me for this exposure? But the big question was simple. Did I have a choice? And the answer was equally simple. No. I had to protect myself, my home, my life. And if that meant shattering my son's illusions about his wife, so be it. As we approached Waco, my resolve only grew stronger. I would fight this battle to the end, no matter how bitter the victory. The day before the trial, I couldn't find a place to be. Finley traveled to Waco and met with Hammond Peck to prepare for the deposition. The lawyer was pleased. Having a witness who could corroborate Mercy's questionable past gave us a serious advantage. "It's not direct evidence of your capacity," Hammond explained to me, "but it does call into question the plaintiff's motives. If the judge sees that the plaintiff's motive is not a concern for your well-being, but a desire to seize assets to finance a dubious business scheme, it will make a big difference in his decision." I nodded, understanding the logic, but my heart was heavy. Tomorrow I was to publicly confront my own son, expose his wife as a fraud. It was a choice I never wanted to make. In the evening, I sat on the veranda watching the sunset. Memories came flooding back to me, of Fletcher, of little Carmine, of happy years spent in this house. I remembered teaching my son to ride his bike on this very street. How Fletcher built him a treehouse in the garden. How we cooked Thanksgiving dinner together, laughing and goofing around in the kitchen. Where did it all go wrong? When did my loving son turn into a man capable of suing to incapacitate his own mother for money? Was it Mercy's fault alone, or had I missed something in my parenting as well? These thoughts haunted me as I went to bed. Sleep wouldn't come, and I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow is the day of the trial. Tomorrow I would find out if I would keep my home and my independence, and tomorrow I might lose my son forever. With this bitter thought, I faced the dawn, having not slept a wink during the night. The morning of the trial was clear and cool. The autumn sun cast a golden glow on my bedroom, but I couldn't find the energy to rejoice in the good weather. Getting out of bed after a sleepless night, I felt defeated but determined. Today was to decide my fate, and the fate of the house that meant so much to me. It took me a long time to decide what to wear. I wanted to look put together, confident, but not too formal. I finally settled on the navy blue suit I'd bought for my student's graduation 2 years ago. I carefully styled my hair and applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, I saw a tired but unbroken woman, a woman who was going to fight for her life. At 9 o'clock, Hammond Peck came to pick me up. He looked collected and confident, which calmed my nerves a little. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Hitch," he said, opening his car door for me. "Finley's already in court waiting his turn. We've made the best possible preparations." "Thank you, Hammond," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Whatever happens today, I'm grateful for your help." He looked at me carefully. "You're worried about your son." It wasn't a question, but a statement. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It's natural," he said softly. "But remember that you're doing it not only for yourself, but for him. Sometimes the truth, no matter how bitter, is the only way to heal." His words were wise, but they couldn't take away the pain in my heart. I stared out the window at the streets of Waco, the city that had become my home. and thought about how things would change after today. The courthouse, an imposing red brick structure with white columns, seemed especially impregnable today. Hammond and I walked up the wide steps and went inside. The lobby was crowded with people, lawyers in smart suits, clerks with folders of documents, citizens waiting for their hearings. We passed through a metal detector and headed toward room number 3 where our hearing was to take place. At the hall door I saw them, Carmine and Mercy. My son looked tense, his face pale and gaunt. He stood with his hands in his pockets staring at the floor. Next to him, Mercy looked radiant. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo, her makeup was flawless, and her bright red suit made her look like a businesswoman on the cover of a magazine. When she spotted me, a smug smile appeared on her face. I forced myself to go forward, even though my insides were clenching from the confrontation ahead. Hammond walked beside me, holding me lightly under the elbow, a supportive gesture for which I was grateful. As we approached, Carmine looked up. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw in them a strange mixture of emotions, determination, doubt, and something akin to shame. He quickly looked away without saying a word. Mercy, on the other hand, stepped forward, blocking my path. "Gwenny," she said with feigned concern in her voice, "you look great today. Finally out of those awful old lady outfits." I wanted to walk past her, ignoring her, but she leaned closer and whispered so only I could hear. "Soon this awful house will be a gold mine. I've already found a buyer willing to pay twice the market price for this location." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I forced myself to stand up straight, not to show how much she'd hurt me. "I'll see you in the courtroom, Mercedes," I said quietly, emphasizing her real name. There was a flicker of alarm in her eyes for a moment, but she quickly pulled herself together and laughed. "Oh, Gwenny, you are quite confused. Further proof of how much you need our help." Hammond gently tugged on my elbow, leading me away from this unpleasant scene. We entered the courtroom and took our seats. A few minutes later, Carmine, Mercy, and their attorney, a young man with a cocky expression, entered. They sat down at the table across from us. I tried not to look at them, concentrating on my hands folded in my lap. Hammond was quietly explaining the procedure of the meeting to me, but I could barely hear his words. My thoughts were whirling about the past, about the future, about the line I was about to cross. At 10 o'clock sharp, Judge Marcus Lowell, an older man with a neat gray beard and attentive eyes, entered the room. Everyone stood up and then sat down again at his sign. "Case number 432, Carmine Hitch v. Gwendolyn Hitch," the clerk announced. "A suit for declaration of incapacity and appointment of guardianship." The judge nodded and turned to the parties. "Before the hearing begins, I would like to remind everyone present that this is a family matter, and I expect a respectful tone throughout. Mr. Jenkins, are you representing the plaintiff?" Counsel for Carmine has risen. "Yes, Your Honor. Pierce Jenkins, I represent Carmine Hitch, the defendant's son. Minus Mr. Peck, do you represent the defendant?" Hammond stood with his back straight. "Yes, Your Honor. Hammond Peck, representing Gwendolyn Hitch." The judge nodded. "Good. Mr. Jenkins, you may state your case." Pierce Jenkins stood up and began to speak in a clear, confident voice. "Your Honor, my client has observed with deep concern the deterioration of the cognitive state of his mother, Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch, in recent months. Mrs. Hitch, a 68-year-old woman, lives alone in a large 2-story home that has become an overwhelming burden for her. My client has repeatedly noticed signs of increasing forgetfulness, disorientation, and inability to make adequate decisions." I listened to these lies, feeling anger building inside. He talked about me like I was a feeble old woman, unable to take care of myself. Me, who had been independent all her life, who had raised her son alone after her husband died, who still had an active social life. "My client is concerned about his mother's safety and well-being," Jenkins continued. "He has noticed that she forgets to pay her bills, doesn't keep a proper eye on the house, and sometimes gets lost in familiar places. All of these are signs of a budding dementia that Mrs. Hitch refuses to acknowledge." I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palms. Hammond put his hand on mine, silently urging me to remain calm. "My client is asking the court to declare his mother incompetent and appoint him legal guardian with the right to administer her estate. This will allow him to provide her with proper care, possibly in a specialized facility for the elderly, and to make a reasonable disposition of her assets, including the house she can no longer maintain. He finished his speech and sat down, throwing me a sympathetic look that struck me as the height of hypocrisy. "Minus Mr. Peck, your answer," the judge said. Hammond rose, his calm confidence contrasting with Jenkins's assertiveness. "Your Honor, my client Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch categorically denies all charges of incapacity. She is fully aware of her actions, capable of caring for herself and managing her property. Mrs. Hitch has undergone a complete physical examination by Dr. Eleanor Miles, a respected neurologist, who found no evidence of dementia or other cognitive impairment." He pulled documents out of a folder. "I present to the court Dr. Miles's medical report, as well as testimony from Mrs. Hitch's neighbors, friends, and former co-workers attesting to her capacity. In addition, we have financial documents proving that Mrs. Hitch pays all bills, taxes, and insurance." The judge accepted the documents and began to review them. "My client," Hammond continued, "believes that the real reason for this lawsuit is not concern for her well-being, but rather the plaintiff's desire to gain control of her property, specifically a home located in a valuable area of the city." I noticed Mercy tense up, her smug smile fading slightly. "Moreover," Hammond paused, "we have reason to believe that behind this lawsuit are the financial interests of the plaintiff's wife, Mrs. Mercy Hitch, who plans to use the proceeds from the sale of the house to finance her own business." Mercy was frowning openly now, and Carmine gave her a surprised look. "That's a serious charge, Mr. Peck," the judge observed. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor. We would like to call a witness who can shed light on the motives behind this lawsuit." The judge nodded. "All right. But first I'd like to hear from the parties to the case themselves. Mrs. Hitch," he turned to me, "can you tell the court about your life? About how you handle your day-to-day affairs?" I stood up, feeling my knees trembling. But when I began to speak, my voice sounded firm. "Your Honor, I'm Gwendolyn Hitch. I'm 68 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 40 years as an elementary school teacher. I live alone in a house that belonged to my late husband and before that to his parents. I take full care of myself, cooking, cleaning, gardening. I have an active social life, participating in a book club, going to concerts, socializing with friends." I described my typical week, how I manage my finances, how I keep my house in order. The judge listened attentively, sometimes asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he thanked me and turned to Carmine. "Mr. Hitch, I'd like to hear from you now. Tell me why you think your mother needs custody." Carmine stood up, avoiding my eyes. "Your Honor, I love my mother," he began uncertainly. "And that's why I'm worried about her. Lately, I've noticed a change in her behavior. She's become forgetful, sometimes repeating the same stories, not remembering that she's told them before. The house has become too big for her. I can see that she can't cope with the cleaning, with the garden." His words sounded rote, like he was repeating what he was told to say. I looked at his face and saw a man torn by inner conflict. "I just want her to be safe," he finished. "To be taken care of properly, not left alone in a big empty house." The judge asked him several questions about specific instances of my alleged forgetfulness or inability to take care of myself. Carmine answered vaguely, without specific examples. This did not escape the judge's attention. "Mrs. Hitch," he turned to Mercy, "and have you noticed any signs of cognitive decline in your mother-in-law?" Mercy straightened, her face taking on an expression of genuine concern. "Oh yes, Your Honor. Gwenny has become so absent-minded. One time she forgot we had an appointment. Another time she couldn't remember the name of a neighbor she'd lived on the same street with for years. And her house. It's in a terrible state. Dust everywhere, the garden neglected. It wasn't the house I remembered when I first went there. Every word she told me was a lie, skillfully mixed with half-truths. Yes, I'd forgotten the appointment because Carmine had changed the time at the last minute and hadn't warned me. Yes, I stammered when remembering my neighbor's name, because I'd had a hard day and was tired, and the house and garden were always in perfect order. Fletcher had taught me the value of cleanliness and comfort. After the parties had spoken, the judge called the witnesses. Hammond asked that Finley Taft be called. As Finley entered the courtroom, I watched Mercy's reaction carefully. At first, she looked puzzled, not recognizing him. After all, it had been a few years and he had changed. But when the clerk announced his name, I saw the color drain from her face. She straightened, eyes widening with shock, then narrowed in a vicious squint. Finley took the oath of office and sat down in the witness seat. He looked nervous but determined. "Minus Mr. Taft," Hammond began. "Tell the court how you met Mrs. Mercy Hitch, formerly known as Mercedes Wilson." Finley took a deep breath and began his story. "I met her 3 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. At the time, she called herself Mercedes Wilson and was opening a beauty salon called Crown of Beauty. I was working as a beautician at another salon when she offered me a job with a higher salary and the promise of a share in the business." He described how Mercedes convinced him to invest his savings in the salon with the promise of golden mountains, how he took out a loan to become a partner in her business, how she hired other talented professionals, promising them high salaries and a percentage of sales. "Things were going well at first," Finley continued. "The salon was beautiful, the customers were coming in, but after a few months the problems started. Delayed paychecks, replacing quality cosmetics with cheap equivalents, strange financial decisions." I stared at Mercy's face. It had gone stony, her lips pressed into a thin line. Carmine looked confused, shifting his gaze from Finley to his wife and back again. "And then she started selling annual passes at a steep discount," Finley told him. "Many customers bought them by paying up front. But instead of investing that money in the salon, paying salaries, or buying cosmetics, she apparently embezzled it. One day we came to work and found the salon closed. Mercedes had disappeared without paying our salaries for 2 months, without returning my investment, and without fulfilling her obligations to her clients." Hammond presented documents to the court: copies of employment contracts, bank statements showing Finley's money transfers to the salon, police reports of unpaid wages, lawsuits from defrauded customers. "Mr. Taft," Hammond asked, "what effect did the closing of Crown Beauty have on you and the other employees?" "Catastrophic," Finley answered honestly. "I lost all my savings and I'm still paying off that loan. My professional reputation suffered. Many people in Tulsa thought we employees were in cahoots with Mercedes. I had to move to another city, start from scratch. And I know I wasn't the only one who suffered. All the employees of Crown Beauty were in a similar situation." There was complete silence in the courtroom during this story. I saw the people present at the hearing look around in shock. Carmine sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped, and Mercy looked like she was ready to explode with rage. Carmine's attorney had tried to discredit Finley's testimony during cross-examination, insinuating that he might have had personal motives for slandering Mercy. But Finley remained calm and confident, his story coherent and supported by documentation. When Finley finished testifying, the judge called a short recess. I saw Carmine and Mercy arguing furiously in a corner of the room, their faces tense, their gestures abrupt. The lawyer tried to calm them down, but to no avail. Hammond came up to me. "Everything's going well," he said quietly. "Finley's testimony made a strong impression on the judge, and your son seems to be shocked too." I nodded, feeling strangely empty. This was what I'd been seeking: the exposure of Mercy, the chance to keep my home. But victory seemed bittersweet. I could see my son's world crumbling, his family crumbling to dust. After a recess, the trial resumed. Now it was Carmine's attorney's turn to present the witnesses. But to my surprise, Pierce Jenkins stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client would like to make a statement." The judge, looking surprised, nodded. "Please, Mr. Hitch." Carmine stood up. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in 1 hour. His face was pale, his eyes reddened. "Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw my suit," he said quietly but firmly. A surprised whisper rippled through the courtroom. Mercy jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with anger. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "We're almost there." "Sit down, Mrs. Hitch," the judge said sternly. "Mr. Hitch, are you sure of your decision?" Carmine nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I was misled. My mother is fully competent, and this lawsuit should never have been filed." The judge looked at him carefully. "Do you understand that withdrawing the suit in this case means admitting that your original allegations were false?" "Yes, Your Honor," Carmine answered without raising his eyes. "I am prepared to take responsibility for my actions." The judge turned to the parties. In light of the withdrawal of the lawsuit, I consider this case closed. Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch is found to have full legal capacity, and no restrictions are placed on her legal capacity. Case dismissed, announced Judge Lowell, striking the gavel. Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch is found to have full legal capacity, and no restrictions are placed upon her legal capacity. The plaintiff has withdrawn her claim, finding it without merit. Thank you, everyone. These words sounded like music to me, but the joy of victory was overshadowed by what I saw in front of me. Mercy, whose face had gone from pale to crimson with anger, jumped up from her seat. Her perfect hair was disheveled, and her eyes were shooting lightning bolts. "It's a conspiracy!" she shouted, pointing a trembling finger first at me, then at Finley. "They're conspiring against me! Everything that man said is a lie! He's been stalking me for years for personal revenge." "Mrs. Hitch," the judge said sternly, "I ask you to calm down. This court is adjourned, and any further such antics may be held in contempt." But Mercy didn't seem to hear him. She turned to Carmine, who was still sitting with his head down. "And you?" Her voice shook with rage. "You just gave up? Dropped the lawsuit without even consulting me? Everything we'd worked for, everything we could have accomplished." "Enough, Mercy," Carmine said quietly but firmly. "Just enough." She stared at him for a few seconds with an expression of utter disbelief, then turned and ran out of the courtroom, leaving everyone in a daze. Hammond gently tugged on my elbow. "Come along, Mrs. Hitch. There's nothing more to do here." I nodded, about to leave, but something made me stop. Carmine was still sitting at the table, as still as a statue. His lawyer was saying something to him, but he didn't seem to hear. I couldn't just leave without saying a word to him. "Wait a minute," I said to Hammond and headed toward my son. As I approached, Carmine lifted his head. His eyes were red, a mixture of pain, shame, and anger. "Carmine," I began, not knowing what to say next. "I'm sorry for what happened." He stared at me for a few seconds, then grinned bitterly. "Sorry? You're sorry?" His voice was quiet but full of bitterness. "You just ruined my family, my life. And you're sorry?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. I expected a lot of things: remorse, embarrassment, even resentment. But not this accusation. "I ruined your family?" I questioned, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. "You filed a lawsuit to take my house away from me, declaring me crazy, and it's my fault?" "You could have talked to me," he said, standing up. "Told me what you found out about Mercy, but instead you went for public humiliation. Dragged some man from her past into court, made you air her dirty laundry in front of the whole town." "When was I supposed to talk to you, Carmine?" I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. "When you stopped picking up the phone? Or when you sent me a subpoena instead of coming to discuss your concerns about my health?" He looked away but continued stubbornly. "You have no idea what you've done. The whole town will be talking about it. How am I supposed to look people in the eye? How can I build a career when everyone knows my wife is a fraud?" "And how was I supposed to look people in the eye if you'd gotten what you wanted?" I countered. "When everyone thinks I'm a senile old woman who can't take care of herself? Did you think about that before you filed the lawsuit?" We stood across from each other, separated not only by physical space, but by a chasm of misunderstanding and resentment. My son, my flesh and blood, looked at me like I was the enemy, and in that moment I realized that our relationship might never be the same. "I have to go," Carmine finally said. "I need to find Mercy, talk to her, figure this whole thing out." "Of course," I answered quietly. "Go." He walked past me without looking back. His shoulders were tense, his back straight like he was carrying a heavy load. I stared after him, feeling my heart clench. Victory in court suddenly seemed like a Pyrrhic victory, the price of my relationship with my only son. Hammond was waiting for me outside the courtroom. Finley stood beside him, looking tired but satisfied. "Are you all right?" the lawyer asked, noticing the look on my face. "No," I answered honestly. "But I will be. Thank you both for your help. Without you, I would have lost this case." "You wouldn't have lost anything," Hammond said softly. "You had all the medical evidence, the testimony of neighbors and colleagues. Even without information about Mrs. Hitch's past, the judge would likely have ruled in your favor." "But now," Finley added, "Mercy knows that her past could come out at any time. That'll stop her from running any more scams, at least in Waco. I nodded, realizing he was right. As painful as that truth was for my son, it protected not only me, but probably a lot of Mercy's other potential victims as well. Finley, I don't know how to thank you, I said. You came from out of town, risked running into trouble because of me. Not because of you, he smiled weakly. Because of justice. I'd lived too long with the idea that she'd gotten away with it. I was relieved now. We exchanged contacts, and I promised to let him know if there was any news about Mercy. Then Hammond drove me home. All the way home, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Waco, trying to realize what had happened today. I'd kept my home, my independence, but I lost my son, at least for a while. As we pulled up to my house, I suddenly felt incredibly tired. All the events of the last few weeks, from the subpoena to today's hearing, were weighing on me. I thanked Hammond for everything and walked slowly up the porch steps. The house greeted me with silence. I took off my coat, walked into the kitchen, and mechanically put on the kettle. Everything seemed the same as before. The same walls, the same furniture, the same pictures on the walls. But something had subtly changed, or changed myself. Making tea, I went out onto the veranda with a cup. It was a quiet autumn evening and the sun was already setting, coloring the sky shades of gold and pink. I sat down in Fletcher's old rocking chair and took a deep breath, letting the tension slowly leave my body. I had won. The house was still mine, but the victory was bitter, tinged with loss and loneliness. I thought about Carmine, about his words in court. Did he really believe he was suing for my good? Or was it a convenient lie he was telling himself to justify his actions? And what would happen to him and Mercy now? Will he be able to forgive her for her deception? Or would their marriage crumble under the weight of the revelations? The thought that I might have caused my son's divorce was painful. But wasn't it better to know the bitter truth now than to continue living a lie? I didn't notice it was getting dark. I was sitting on the veranda, absorbed in my thoughts, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. My heart jumped. Was Carmine coming back to talk to me? But it wasn't his car. An unfamiliar pickup truck pulled up to the house, and Theobald Ray got out. He stepped up onto the porch, holding a folder. "Good evening, Mrs. Hitch," he said. "I hope it's not too late for a visit?" "No, not at all," I turned on the porch light. "Come in and sit down. Would you like some tea?" He sat down in the wicker chair across from me. "I heard the case was dismissed in your favor." "Congratulations." "Thank you," I smiled weakly. There was little joy in that victory, though. Theobald nodded understandingly. "Family conflicts are always difficult, especially when you have to choose between truth and relationships." I brought him tea, and we sat in silence for a while, enjoying the quiet evening. Finally, Theobald handed me a folder. "I wanted to give you this. Information I've gathered about Mercy Hitch and her past. You don't need it for the trial anymore, but it might come in handy in the future." I took the folder, not knowing what to do with it. Did I want to know even more about my daughter-in-law's shady dealings? Wasn't it enough what had already come out in court? "There's something interesting in there," Theobald added, noticing my hesitation. "Contacts of other people who'd been victimized by her scams, not just in Tulsa, but in other cities. Turns out the Crown of Beauty wasn't her first project." I opened the folder and started going through the files. Articles from local newspapers, copies of complaints to the Better Business Bureau, screenshots of social media posts. The stories of people who'd lost money to Mercy were remarkably similar. The same promises, the same schemes, the same sudden name change and move to another city. "She's done this before," I muttered, turning the pages. "In Birmingham, Alabama, then Shreveport, Louisiana, now in Tulsa, and each time with a new name." "Yes," Theobald nodded. "She's a professional con artist, and she never seems to stay in one place for long." I kept reading, feeling the anger building inside. How many lives had she ruined with her scams? How many people were left with debts, ruined reputations, shattered dreams? The folder contained contact information, too. Names, email addresses, phone numbers of people affected by Mercy's actions. Finley was just one of many. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, raising my eyes to Theobald. "Because you're not the only victim," he answered simply. "And you might not be the last." If Mercy leaves Waco, she'll start over in another city, with a different name, with new victims. I pondered his words. Was my duty ended there? I'd protected my home, exposed Mercy to Carmine. Wasn't that enough? My musings were interrupted by the sound of the phone. The number was unfamiliar. Gwendolyn Hitch, I answered. Mrs. Hitch, it's Finley Taft. I apologize for the late call, but I thought you should know. I've just gotten some messages from former colleagues at Crown Beauty. They found out about the trial and that I testified against Mercy. They're thanking you for not being afraid to stand up to her, for publicly exposing her scam. I didn't know what to say. A lot of them are still paying off debts, Finley continued. Some of them lost their homes, some of them lost their jobs. But worst of all, they thought they'd never see justice, that Mercy would always get away with it. What you did today, it gives them hope. His words touched something deep inside me. I remembered the feeling of helplessness when I got the subpoena, the feeling that the whole world had turned against me, that the truth didn't matter if someone had money and influence. How many other people have felt the same way about Mercy? Thank you for calling, Finley, I said. It means a lot to me. After the conversation ended, I sat staring at the file folder Theobald had brought. A decision was ripening inside me that would have seemed impossible just a few hours ago. I want to contact these people, I said to Theobald. Everyone who's been hurt by Mercy. Maybe together we can accomplish what we couldn't alone. Theobald looked at me carefully. Do you realize that this could be a long and complicated process, and that your son might see it as another betrayal on your part? I sighed, realizing he was right. Carmine had already accused me of destroying his family. What would he say if I started gathering people for a class action lawsuit against his wife? But then I remembered Finley's words about the hope my court appearance had given Mercy's other victims. People still paying off debts because of her fraud. People who could be her next victims if she started over in a new city. I understand the risk, I said firmly. But I can't just sit back knowing she could do it again, especially now that I know I'm not alone in my struggle. Theobald nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. In that case, I will help you. I have connections in legal circles, acquaintances in other cities where Mercy has operated. Together, we can build a strong enough case. We discussed the first steps, creating a group on a secure messenger to communicate with all the victims, gathering documents and evidence, consulting with lawyers about the possibility of a class action. By the time Theobald left, it was well past midnight, but I felt strangely elated. For the first time in a long time, I had a purpose beyond mere survival, not just to keep my home, but to help others who had suffered injustice, to use my experience, my knowledge, my pain for something greater. The next morning brought a surprise. When I went out to pick up the mail, I found an envelope signed in Carmine's hand on the porch. Inside was a short note. Mom, Mercy is gone, packed up her things and disappeared, leaving only a note saying she needed time to think. I don't know if she'll come back, and I'm not sure I want her to. But I also don't know if I can ever forgive you for ruining my family, my idea of the life I was building. You could have told me the truth in person, but instead you chose public humiliation. I need time and space. Please don't try to contact me. I will find you myself when I am ready, Carmine. I reread the note several times, feeling tears come to my eyes. Mercy had run away like she always did when her scams were exposed. And my son was left to deal with the shards of his life alone. And he blamed me for it. It was painful to read his words, to see his anger and frustration. But I understood him. He had just found out that the woman he loved, the woman he trusted, had used him for her machinations, that their whole life together could have been part of her plan. He needed someone to direct his anger at, and I was a convenient target. I folded the note and tucked it away in my dresser drawer. Maybe someday, when the pain had subsided, we could talk, explain to each other our motives, our fears, our hopes. But right now, we both needed time. That evening, I sat on the veranda again, watching the sunset. The phone on the table beside me beeped softly. A message had arrived. It was a link to a messenger group created by Theobald. Mercedes Victims, the name said. 28 members already. I opened the chat room and saw messages from people in different cities: Birmingham, Shreveport, Tulsa. Stories similar to mine. Deception, manipulation, financial loss. And in the midst of it all, words of gratitude to me, the woman who wasn't afraid to confront mercy in the open. Thank you for your courage, Mrs. Hitch, the woman from Birmingham wrote. You have given us hope that justice is possible, a man from Shreveport added. I sat looking at these messages and felt a warmth spill inside. Yes, the victory was bitter. Yes, I may have lost a son, but I had gained something new. A community of people united by a common pain and a common purpose. People I could help with my experience and my determination. I began typing a reply, feeling my fingers shaking slightly with excitement. Hello, my name is Gwendolyn Hitch. I understand your pain, your anger, your helplessness. I've been through the same thing. But now we're together. And together we will get justice, not only for ourselves, but for those who could be the next victims. I'm with you all the way to the end of this journey. After sending the message, I leaned back in my chair, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. It was a long journey ahead, full of hardships and perhaps more losses. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was going in the right direction, that my pain and my experiences could be a force to make a difference. In that moment, I realized that by protecting my home, I hadn't just kept a roof over my head. I had found a new purpose, a new meaning to life. And no matter how high the price was, I did not regret my choice.